CPX-351 is a liposomal in formulation of cytarabine and daunorubicin that's been optimized to be at the synergistic combination. It was approved in 2017 by the FDA for the treatment of patients with secondary or MDS type AML. So in addition to all of the approval studies that were conducted with CPX-351 and the safety studies, more recently in the time that those studies had concluded and we were awaiting FDA approval, what's called an EAP, an expanded access program for CPX-351 was made available at sites across the country. And so what we were able to do was to enroll patients who otherwise wouldn't have access to the drug and give them intensive induction chemotherapy with CPX-351, or Vyxeos as it's now called. What is great is that we were able to get the drug to patients who ultimately met the label indication and do it much sooner. What we have seen is that the safety signals from the expanded access program are very similar to what we've seen in other studies of the trial, as well as the response rates that we've seen so far. Other interesting data that's being presented at the meeting on CPX-351 is data regarding patients on the original registration trial who went on to stem cell transplant. And so what we saw was 34% of patients in the CPX-351 arm versus 25% of patients on the standard 7+3 arm were able to go on to stem cell transplant. And we know in high-risk AML that transplant represents the best potential for curative therapy. And so looking at that in this exploratory analysis is really important as we think about the value that CPX-351 brings to our armamentarium in AML. Importantly, on the phase 3 registration trial of CPX-351, there was improved overall survival for all patients on the investigational arm compared to conventional 7+3. When we did this exploratory analysis landmarked from the time of transplant, we also saw a survival benefit for patients who got CPX-351. So what we saw was that the survival for patients who got 7 and 3 and then went on to transplant, the median survival is just over 10 months, whereas in the CPX-351 arm, that median overall survival has not yet been reached. So while we don't completely understand the biology and what CPX-351 may be doing in this liposomal encapsulated synergistic dauno to cytarabine ratio, it's very interesting and very hypothesis generating to look at how this drug is having effects even when you take into account a stem cell transplant. We certainly know that the transplant, based on all of our years of data, is improving overall survival for these patients, but there appears to be a signal that CPX-351 is also contributing to survival post-transplant as compared to those patients on the trial who got 7+3.